Welcome to episode 430 of the Brainy Business, understanding the psychology of why people buy. Today's episode is all about how to change, a conversation with Dr. Katy Milkman. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Today's episode is all about how to change. This was such a fun conversation with the wonderful Katy Milkman, which originally aired in May 2021 when both of us had books coming out, and I'm so excited to refresh it for you here today. This episode is on theme with a few that I've been sharing over the last few weeks, talking about defaults and habits, learning and how to get better at anything, and then capping that off with understanding of how we can be most likely to really live those changes and succeed in getting more of the right things done. I really love Katy's work and this conversation. I hope you enjoy it and get as much out of it as I do. Don't forget, there are links for my top related past episodes and books waiting for you in the show notes for this episode, which are found within the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/430. All right, let's talk about how to change. Dr. Katy Milkman, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So audience, if we sound like extra energetic, we've been chit-chatting for a little bit in getting ready. And I know corresponding over email, and this is the first time we've met in Zoom person. So it's kind of fun where we've been chatting, for a year or something, I think leading up to this over social and then email. And our books are coming out 1 week apart. And so just seemed like a fortuitous situation to kind of come together. So I've definitely talked about you on the show before, but in case this is anyone's first episode or just to share a little bit, can you tell a little about your background and who you are for those who are listening?
Sure. Yeah, of course. I'm a professor at the Wharton School, where I also co-direct the Behavior Change for Good initiative, which I co-founded about 5 years ago with Angela Duckworth to try to figure out if we could crack the code on what creates enduring behavior change. And I'm also the author of the book, How to Change: The Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be, and host of my own podcast called Choiceology about the behavioral science of everyday life.
All the things is what you've got going on.
Just a few. Life is mostly pretty boring. Not a lot going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Just hanging out.
It's fun. It's all such fun.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, I have been a fan of yours for a long time. And so it's a joy to have you on the show. And I feel, so just as the primer for those listening, so Angela Duckworth, her book Grit and her TED Talks and everything, I mean, I love her stuff. And so for anyone who's already a fan of Angela Duckworth and her style, I could feel it was a similar voice quality in your book where I can tell why you guys get along, where it's a nice storytelling and kind of drawing the reader in with those experiences instead of just being this kind of academic of say point. You do a really nice job of weaving the book together with a really conversational tone and the story behind the research, which I very much love.
Thank you. And it's the highest honor imaginable to be compared with Angela, who's one of my closest friends and also certainly a role model.
Well, and so that's where I would say, so first open, and I'm opening a digital book because obviously I got this early, but then, you read the, dedication / forward at the beginning from Angela Duckworth, who has won a MacArthur Genius Award. And she says, Katy Milkman is the smartest person I know. In your book, that's a big deal. So for people who are listening and thinking, who's Katy Milkman? She's a smart person doing really amazing things. And she talks about how you are not superhuman, but a superhuman, which I think is such an interesting way to show how you've over the years done some me search to help change the way you do behavior, and then helping others now to do the same with your amazing book, How to Change. So that's my this book's awesome. Katy's awesome.
I'm blushing fluorescent red for your listeners can't see me, but Angela wrote a very kind foreword, and of course, I am not the smartest person she knows, but it was very nice of her to say that. And we have a lot of fun together and are a very, I think, good team and well matched in the way we approach the world.
Well, now that I have potentially thoroughly embarrassed you a little bit, thank you. I purposely didn't tell you I was going to say any of that before we started talking, but feel like it needs to be acknowledged because it's a big deal. And so let's just jump in a little bit about the research and me search that you've done. So I have already had an episode on temptation bundling specifically.
I saw that. It was so exciting. Thank you for covering it.
Of course. And have talked about the fresh start effect, though it doesn't have its own episode yet, but I'm sure that will be coming. So if you think about what's the most important of this is, I know, the hardest question of say the most important research you've done, but if something was most foundational when you're thinking about change for people, what's the most eye-opening or something that you like to start with?
Sure. Well, if you've knocked off temptation bundling and fresh starts, which are two of my favorite topics,
you can talk about them now too, for sure.
Well, okay. Let me do I can do fresh starts briefly because that would probably be my answer, but I'll give you a third treat that isn't, it's work that I've gotten to collaborate on, but it's really an insight from someone else that opened my eyes and surprised me. Okay, let me start with fresh starts. The research I've done with Heng-Chen Dai and Jason Reese on fresh starts all started. Its fresh start was about a decade ago when I visited Google, and I was there for a conference of HR leaders at the company and academics who were interested in studying work and how to make it better. And I got this amazing question from Prasad Sethi, who is in the audience. He was a VP of HR at Google and actually a Wharton alum. And he said, Katy, we're totally sold on this idea that we should be using behavioral science to change behavior for the better at the organization. We want to help people be more productive, exercise more regularly, save more for retirement, quit smoking, you name it, we're in. Let's figure out the behavioral science tricks to do it. But when should we actually deploy these programs? Is there some ideal time? And that was such a great question that it just changed my career. I went back to Wharton and to my student at the time, Heng-Chen Dai, who's now a professor at UCLA's Anderson School of Management, and to my friend Jason Reese, who is a visiting professor. And we sort of couldn't stop talking about it, frankly, for years or working on it. And what we ended up discovering through both reading past research and doing our own original work was that there are moments throughout our lives that feel like new beginnings. And we're very familiar with the New Year's effect and how that feels like a new beginning. But there are others too. I think actually the end of the pandemic, not that there will be a moment when it ends, but sort of as we're slowly seeing the end coming. And I don't think it has to be literally like a date that feels like a new beginning, but you can have the experience that something new is starting, a new era is beginning, starting a week, a Monday, celebrating a birthday, or bigger things, right? You move to a new job, you move to a new community, you have a child, and all of those things make you feel like you're opening a new chapter in your life. And what we found in our work is that at those moments, you're more motivated to change. You're more open to change. And when there's like a physical change that accompanies it, say moving to a new place, it's actually easier to change because your routines have been disrupted and you have more of a blank slate to work from. So both there's the psychological effect where just the start of a new week makes you more motivated, more likely to say create a goal on a goal setting website or visit the gym or even search the term diet on Google at a moment like that. But also if you have a physical disruption because whatever the old haunts were that you used to go to where you had some bad habits, those are no longer on your path. That can be really helpful. So our research on fresh starts and the power of those moments to change our motivation and therefore our ability to make an impact for the better on our lives. I think that's sort of like the biggest aha from my research. I'm really excited to share that with the world. I've shared it already, but I'm excited that that's a big message from the book. Okay, so that's one, but let me pause. I don't know if you want me to keep going.
No, I was just going to say that I love that like I was saying, I've obviously read that paper multiple times and other articles of yours researching for my own episode and for my teaching and stuff. But having the story behind that, where you've shared some of it here, there's even more detail, of course, in the book talking about how you're uncovering these things. And I think it's such an important point to make for people too, which might be getting at, I think, something else that might be the like surprise nugget that you're going to share. But it feels like we read the paper and you think like, oh, cool, they figured that out. And because it's such an obvious thing, it feels like it was just a quick thing to figure out. And you can't help yourself but think it was like, oh, I just decided one day these matter. And then ta-da, it became a research paper. Yay me. But like, really, like you said, that's years of conversations and dedication and multiple team members and studies and all these things going together to make that happen. And so helping to bring some context to this being a longer term experience to find some of these answers is I think really important. So from that first question that you got while you were at Google, and I love a great question, to
me too.
Right. Yay. To the paper that, first like publishing the Fresh Start Effect paper and, coining some of these terms and things. How long did that take, even like approximately?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I should know. Maybe 2 or 3 years, probably from the first conversation. Maybe 2 years. It was actually pretty fast in that. I've had projects that take 7, 8 years, and this one was a little speedier because, as you said, it wasn't subtle. Like when we started analyzing data, it was one of those things that just leapt off the page. And so sometimes when you're probing a question that's a little subtler about human nature, it can take a while to sort of find the right context to have it leap out, or the right study design to demonstrate and to get at the underlying mechanism, which is part of what you have to do when you publish in a scientific journal, or at least the kinds that I tend to publish in. It was so clear that I think it was a little faster than usual. But that's probably terrifying that 2 years is pretty fast.
That's what I was going to...
That was warp speed. It's warp speed.
I think it shows so much the difference of just even the approaches or angles at which you and I work in behavioral science, right? So coming from the academic side where you said 2 years and be like, whoa, it only was 2 years. That's amazing. And when I'm working with people in business, they're like, 2 years, you're out of your mind. That's forever, right?
Like, right, I need this like I'll be yesterday. Fired by then if I don't have my...
Right. I have 3 months to make that happen. So I think it's just a great balance of showing, one, having some patience, and maybe whether it's, priming or properly framing the message with your team before, when you're talking about, if I get a lot of questions about starting, nudge units in a business and how do we do that? And I say, like, whatever you think your test should be to get started, make it like small 1%.
Yeah, less ambitious.
Right.
Yeah.
Do some little things, get some small wins first.
Totally, to like build up momentum. For what it's worth, even though it took 2 years to get to the sort of final polished paper that is the Fresh Start Effect paper that sort of started a research stream on this, we had some results and it was clear what we had learned within a few months. So just to be fair to anyone who's like thinking about a career in academia and is about to throw in the towel, it's not like you don't answer your questions for 2 years or 7 years. You normally have a pretty good answer. It's really the refining and the total, the really deep understanding of the why and the boundary conditions. And that's what we go after as scientists, to be able to publish the seminal paper. So that's what takes 2 years, rather than the insight and documenting some evidence of it. We were pretty sure we understood that there was something real there quite quickly.
Right. Yeah. And then it's just digging in and make sure there's not, is this actually a causation versus a correlation? And how do we do all these? Right. Is there something we're not thinking of that's causing this impact? Yeah, definitely. Okay. So what's the other story / tidbit / topic that you were going to bring up?
Oh, the other story. Yeah. Well, I didn't give you anything counterintuitive about Fresh Starts because they are not counterintuitive. But let me jump to the other thing that I think is really interesting that's in the book and fresh. This is a project that I got to be sort of a tag along on that was led by Lauren Eskris-Winkler. She's a brilliant postdoc at the University of Chicago, is about to join the faculty at the Kellogg School of Management. And she had this insight when she was Angela Duckworth's doctoral student that if we wanted to create, she was trying to figure out how to make people grittier. Like what is the equation? What's the formula that makes a person gritty? And how can we help people get grittier? And in trying to answer that question, she did all these interviews. She was talking to all these people about, what could help you? Like C students, struggling salespeople, like what's missing? Like what's the missing ingredient? And she had this interesting experience of listening to them talk about what was missing and realizing they had tons of wisdom about what they should be doing. It wasn't like a C student didn't know they should they should start studying for the test a week in advance. They should put their cell phone away, like not go out the night before, get a good night's sleep, eat healthy, go to all of the review sessions. Like they know, they're just not doing it. And the other thing she could tell is that it was really demoralizing for them to be getting like tons of advice from other people when they knew already what their challenges were. And so she had this insight that I think is really brilliant, which was, what if instead of basically flooding these people with suggestions and like sort of patting them on the back and obnoxiously being like, well, son, if you just buckle down, instead of us giving them all this advice, if we're trying to figure out how to encourage folks to succeed who are struggling, what if we flip the script? What if we put them in the position of advice givers? Because they're constantly being demoralized and confidence is starting to be part of the problem. And if we ask them to actually be role models and offer advice to their peers who are also struggling, a few things might happen. One, it might boost their confidence immensely because now all of a sudden we're telling them, we think you aren't so clueless. We think you've got what it takes. And confidence is a big barrier to success for some people. The second thing she realized is it was going to sort of force them to do introspection and dredge up insights that she knew from her interviews they actually had lying around that just maybe they hadn't really thought deeply about before. And so there might be knowledge buried inside them. And of course, those insights, if they're trying to tell someone else what to do, they're going to be insights based on their own experience. So they're probably going to work pretty well for them. So like personally tailored insights. And then finally, there's something called the saying is believing effect that she thought might help, which is when I say something to you, when I tell you something or communicate something, I start to believe it, especially if I'm proselytizing about something I'm telling you to do it. It's going to feel hypocritical if I don't do it myself. So she had this insight, like, what if we basically use asking people for advice as an intervention to help improve their outcomes? And she did a series of laboratory studies showing that when people are asked for advice, it improves their motivation to achieve in that domain. And then together we ran this big experiment with high school students in Florida, along with Angela and Dr. Dina Gromay. All of us, it was this big partnership with nearly 2,000 students who were randomly assigned to either give advice to a younger peer at the beginning of the semester on how to improve their grades in a class they cared most about. Then they were left alone. So it took about 8 minutes for them to answer these questions and give this sort of peer advice. And there was a control group that didn't get asked for advice, but otherwise everything was the same about them. And we measured at the end of that quarter what the grades were of these students, the ones who had given advice to their peers and the ones who hadn't. And we measured their grades in the class they said they most wanted to improve in math, which were the two variables we'd predefined as our goals. We were hoping we would see movement on them. And almost miraculously, giving advice to other people improved these students' outcomes significantly on both of those measures. Now, it wasn't like we turned C students into valedictorians. These are small effects. It was an 8-minute intervention, but it did significantly improve their grades, about 1 point higher. So if you were going to get an 85 on average that semester, you're up to like an 86, but it takes 8 minutes and it significantly improved grades. And it was sort of amazing to me. It was surprising how powerful it is and that our intuition is wrong. Most people think it'd be more helpful to get advice than to give it and don't see the value in that. And I think there's like a few programs. If you look at like Alcoholics Anonymous, not only does every new member get like a sponsor, someone who's going to coach them and mentor them, but those mentors are existing members. So they're getting something out of it too. So I think that like you see this happening in the real world a lot, where organizations have somehow tapped this in their mentoring programs, but maybe not deliberately in all cases. And there's this huge power, I think, in recognizing that when you coach others, you're helping yourself.
Right. Well, and that you might think like, well, that person hasn't made it to the level that they're good enough to be a mentor yet, so we'll just keep them as a mentee. But you might be inadvertently like getting them stuck in that problem forever.
Absolutely.
Where if you give them that chance to mentor someone, they can actually grow themselves and really level up in a way that I think is just as with all these sorts of things, that best research or, where I've done work on brand naming or taglines, and when you come up with the one where it's just so obviously where it feels like, well, that probably took 10 seconds. And that's how, but that those are actually some of the hardest things to uncover and figure out. So because we just assume there's this like known truth, I like to say, on the other side, where we just assume change is hard, or like people want to be that way, or it's because they aren't educated enough is the problem. Last year, the Nobel Prize, some of the Nobel Prizes that went out were about helping students to learn more in Africa and in rural parts of Asia, and where they assumed the problem is that they don't have access to books. They need books. Ta-da, right? And so many people would just jump in. That's obviously the problem. We should set up a nonprofit or a foundation and get them all these great new books. Yay, us, pat on the back. We did it. Thankfully, they did some research and found out that it was not the books. It was that the teachers weren't motivated to show up for class. And so incentivizing those teachers to come made the difference in the grades, and the classes that were given new books did not have a benefit in the same way. And so taking that time to, like we were already saying, like dig deeper, look more, can help you find this little thing that's actually pretty easy to do. It's easier than some of the other stuff might have been, and it can make a really big difference.
I love that you went in that direction, because I think, I know you've read my book, but one of the key messages of it is really that too often we don't take the time to figure out what's the actual barrier to change and to do that work. Instead, we sort of slap a universal solution on it. Like, a lot of self-help books just have a recipe that sort of, here's how you build habits, or here's how you set the most audacious and effective goals. But it's not always the case that the barrier requires that solution. And if it's, if it's a confidence challenge, you do something different than if it's a self-control challenge, which is something different than if it's like a hassle factor or forgetting challenge, and which is also different than if it's a habit challenge. So that's a major lesson, I think, of my roughly 2 decades of studying behavior change that I hope readers of the book will take away. And I think the story you just told about that work on schools is a great illustration of how powerful it is to make sure you're not solving the wrong problem before you deploy your solution. It's very costly to deploy the wrong solution.
That's what I always say. It's really easy to find the right answer to the wrong question. And so making sure that it fits for you and not getting sucked in, I think, even on survivorship bias, which ends up being a problem where somebody's looking back on what they think was most effective for them. And so they write that, book or self-help.
Yeah. And it's a pernicious issue. So I hope people who read my book will find that useful.
I am sure that they will. And because all that research is back there and you have those stories and it flows in a like, do this and then consider this. And also, what about this sort of thing? Walking through that journey is nice. I mentioned the me search at the beginning, but I don't think we actually defined it. So I think that's a really important part of why this book is so impactful, that instead of just getting sucked in on the survivorship bias bit of that, of like, oh, I became successful because I get up at 5 a.m. or whatever, and, work however much. Instead, say, this is an interesting thing. I'm going to dig in. Can you tell a little bit more about me search and what that's done for you?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I love that you asked that question about me search. I think one of the things that has made my career really fun is that I realized the problems that plague me and the people I care about were legitimately important problems to study because they're so common and they can accumulate to matter so much. For instance, I was blown away to learn that 9% of premature deaths in the world are due to inadequate physical activity. And I always struggle to motivate myself to exercise enough, for instance. And I thought, like, if I could figure this out for myself, that'd be so great. And then I realized, well, if I could figure it out and help some other people, that might be even better. And now I understand that actually, if we can figure out these kinds of behavior change problems, we can really save lives. So it's not, there's the individual insight that often comes from introspection and looking at what works for you. And that nugget often informs things that can be really valuable. And that's been extremely rewarding for me to see, like, how we can go from, this is a thing that annoys me about myself and my friends, and wow, there's a big opportunity here. I mentioned the 9% of premature mortality is due to physical inactivity. It turns out 40% is due to decisions that could be changed about everything from eating to drinking to vehicle safety. Just really big opportunity for impact, but it all can start with just recognizing what are the challenges any individual is having, because we're all the same. We're all wired the same way. So anyway, I find it really exciting that there's a way to have a big positive impact that can begin with just an insight about yourself or the people around you.
I think it's such an important reframe on the brain too. So typically, I am a person, I know I'm alone in this, that has struggled with my weight and eating for a long time, right? Yeah. Like it's just me out here.
Yeah. You're alone. There's no one else.
Shoot. Okay. Well, so having that and knowing that a lot of other people deal with that, and it can feel very, even though it's hard for people, but you want to, and you have this optimism bias that this time is going to be different. And even like where you say, you have your fresh start, but it might not be, it's not just, if it was only the fresh start that could do it, every New Year's resolution would stick, but a lot of them don't. And so
thus my book does not end after that chapter.
Ta-da! We did it. Yay. But with that, you end up in this state where you are just, and I think it's getting back even to that confidence where you're saying about the C students, like we know what we should do. And it's so just like, I am bad. Like I know other people can do this really well. There's something wrong with me that I need to fix. And it's a me problem. And what I really love about what you show in the book and what your research goes to show is this, by reframing that just a little bit and to say, if I have this problem, I know a lot of people struggle with this as well. I'm going to figure out the why for all of us. Like, why do we do this? And how might we change that and make it better? And finding just one really powerful why can give you a purpose that it then applies some of that, teaching others and learning along the way. And when you have that underlying motivation, can help you to feel really positive about yourself instead of being demoralizing in a way that keeps you stuck. So even like that tiny shift of finding the thing that's motivating for you can change everything.
I love that way of putting it. I agree.
Thanks. Oh, I feel like I said a thing that there wasn't additional response. It's like woo, like, yay, how exciting.
You nailed it.
Yes.
Knocked it out of the park. Nothing more to say.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. So along those lines, I did have a couple other where I was like making notes of things I wanted to ask or bring up. And we've already talked about most of them. One of the other pieces so we sort of touched on this, but to kind of bring it home was your, I feel like I'm going to pick the wrong name, so I'm not even going to try, but it was, but thinking about treating like a chronic illness instead of a rash, which I think was a great point.
Thank you. It was funny. I remember when Angela read that, she was like, I don't know about the rash comment. And she was like, no, it's a thing about a rash. I was like, well, it's working for me. I'm going to stick with it.
I get it. I like it.
Thank you. That's my voice, apparently. It's a little different than Angela's. She was like, I wouldn't go with the rash. One of the more frustrating findings of my career, I will say, is that Angela and I, when we co-founded this center, the Behavior Change for Good initiative, our big mission was to figure out what creates durable behavior change. And one of our first massive projects was a partnership with 24 Hour Fitness on a project where we tested, we tested over 50 different strategies that in a 28-day program, different scientists had designed that were meant to deliver long-term behavior change. So we did this big experiment with 60,000 24-hour fitness gym members.
I was one of them.
No, that's so cool. Oh my gosh, I love you. Now I want to know what treatment condition you were in, but that's a little, anyway.
The problem is I don't know enough of what the other ones were and specifically what was being tested, but we could talk through some of it and see.
Magic. So cool that you were in our study.
Yep.
Okay, so we ran this huge study and got all this data back to see what changed behavior. And okay, let me start with the good news. The good news is like a ton of things worked. They were really inexpensive, that they increased gym visits by up to 30% at the cost of like 75 cents a person for a month. So that's great. We were feeling good about that. But here's the crummy part. We had this program. It lasted a month. Then the program ended, and the wish was that magically the habits we had established in that time would last forever.
Right.
And we looked at the follow-up period, and a few things were sticky, but almost nothing was. On average, maybe 30% of the change we had produced lasted, but there were no runaway winners. It was really the case that there was a lot of fall off. And that was such a bummer to us. We were both so disappointed. And I remember calling Kevin Volpe, who's this brilliant MD, PhD at Penn, who runs a group called the Center for Health Incentives and Behavioral Economics, and who's just like always a source of wisdom, and talking to him about this. And I was like, Kevin, it didn't work. We didn't change people forever. Our 28-day program didn't change their lives and completely fix whatever was wrong with their gym habits. And he said, anyway, I really was probably that dramatic. I know that was a ridiculous voice.
No, I just did. It wasn't. It actually reminded me of something I did in my undergraduate where I got got caught in the curve and got like a C on something. And I came home and was like, I'm average. And I was crying about it. So
sometimes there were these moments. So anyway, the voice, you have to use the voice to express. I was really upset. So I called Kevin. I was like, what have we done? What's wrong? And Kevin, in the way that he's just a very thoughtful person, he sort of paused and he said, Katy, was that a reasonable goal? Think about the way that we treat chronic diseases. If someone is diagnosed as diabetic, we don't put them on insulin for a month and then take them off and expect them to be cured. Why do you think behavior change is any different? Why do you think it's something where it's like one and done? It's like a rash and you slap ointment on it. No, it's a chronic, all of these problems, the human condition where we struggle with self-control, we struggle with confidence, our motivation waxes and wanes, we have bad habits and they tug at us. All of those things we forget, they aren't going away in 28 days. Right. So why would you think you only need a 28-day cure? And I was like, slap in the face moment. Duh. Okay. Thank you, Kevin, for I'm so grateful and it was like, yeah, of course. And I think when you look at the research, there's just so much evidence supporting the idea that if we don't drop out of people's lives, if we find something that's working for them, but keep them going on it, that's where you see the durable change. There's no need for our program to end after 28 days. It should have been a lifelong program. And I mentioned Alcoholics Anonymous earlier, which is, of course, an incredibly successful program for an incredibly challenging problem. It doesn't, you're always in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not 28 days. And so right. I think we have to have more realistic expectations when we want to change behavior, that if you want to create durable change, it has to be a durable commitment and durable solutions instead of something temporary.
Well, I think it brings it back to the shadow side, we'll say, of the fresh start effect, right? So you go through, you think of the contestants on The Biggest Loser, and they lose their hundreds of pounds or whatever it is, and they're in great shape and they know exactly what they should do. But then there's this big marked shift that their trainer's gone and they're not at the gym all the time, and the distractions from home come in, and you just fall like way off the wagon. Yeah. And so where like with your, I think it was in the temptation bundling studies that then there's Thanksgiving break and all the progress were like, yay. And then you go, oh man, like,
yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And Heng Chen, who I mentioned earlier, who led the work on the fresh start effect, for her dissertation, she had to write a paper by herself, and she ended up biting off this piece that we'd been like, circling around, recognizing that not only can fresh starts be good, but they can be disruptive. So when you're trying to start something new, a disruption, and that sort of sense that, okay, it's a new chapter, a new beginning, that's really motivating. But when you're doing well, it's exactly the opposite, because now you feel disconnected from the progress you've made, have to start again. If you're in a new setting, you have to figure out the path that dodges the Dunkin' Donuts to work from your new home. You'd already figured that out in your old home, but now you have to do it again. And this time you might not find it fast enough before the Dunkin' Donuts cravings win. Mm-hmm. I feel bad that I'm picking on Dunkin' Donuts a little bit, because anyway, any donut shop.
Right.
So it can be really disruptive to have a fresh start if things are going well. And it's really hard to hold on and keep making progress. So constant vigilance. I think actually there was a period, I don't know if you're a Harry Potter fan, but I love that.
I'm so glad. I was going to bring up Harry Potter, and I was like, will she be bothered if I bring up Harry Potter? So, but go ahead.
You were going to bring it up in the same context?
Not actually in the same context, I don't think, because we haven't gotten there. But I read that your temptation bundling was because like the Harry Potter books being part of what you were wanting to read. So it's like, yes, I can ask this about Harry Potter, because the listeners know I'm a big nerd for it, for sure.
Oh, yay. I was so glad to have an excuse to mention Harry Potter in my book. Yes, I love Harry Potter. I love fiction in general. And obviously Harry Potter is like as good as it gets in the fiction. In the like
storytelling.
In the fun fiction category. There's also lots of highbrow, wonderful fiction, but it's all great. It's magnificent. I was an American Studies minor in college. And anyway, this is like a weird tangent, but hey. Speaking of temptation bundling, I was an engineering major, an American Studies minor. I had to write a senior thesis to graduate, and I wanted to do something fun so that I would like it. And what I ended up doing was a statistical analysis of 10 years of New Yorker fiction, because I wanted the excuse to read for my thesis instead of just crunching numbers.
Nice.
It was the most fun thing ever. Anyway, so back to Harry Potter. Yes, I love Harry Potter, and the constant I think it's probably irrelevant to say the constant vigilance thing now. Hopefully
no, I love it. Bring it.
Got lots of this. Okay. In the chapter of my book where I sort of talk about the need for durable solutions to create durable change rather than thinking you're going to find out a quick fix, one of the things I point out is sort of like constant vigilance, which is a Harry Potterism. Actually, the bad guys are saying it, but but I do think it's true. If we want to change, we have to remain vigilant. At some point, that was my chapter title, Constant Vigilance, and I think maybe it was a little too aggressive. Got swapped out.
I love it. So what I was going to ask, and actually this is perfect timing for it, because as we're closing out here, where it's kind of fun so in case you couldn't tell, I don't like to have just the same conversation with people especially you're promoting the book. You have a lot of people asking you the same type of stuff, and you're probably telling the same stories. So talking about something that's like a little bit different, but fun for you, fun for the audience. So I like to do that. But what I wanted to ask is, in this like knowing a little bit more about Katy Milkman, are you as big of a Harry Potter nerd as I, in that, do you know which house you're in? Have you done the test to be sorted into a house? And if so, which house are you in? And if not, do you have one that you like?
I didn't know that there was a test. And now I obviously am going to go Google that. And
Links coming your way. Don't you worry.
I didn't know there was a test. I have a 5-year-old who I have not yet read Harry Potter to. I will say it was not a small part of my motivation to become a parent that I was thinking, totally. I get to read Harry Potter again, cover to cover, and like with fresh eyes and ears involved. So
yes,
probably Ravenclaw. I would think Ravenclaw.
I was actually officially sorted into Ravenclaw. So welcome to the house. We're honored to have you.
That's where all the nerds hang out.
Totally. Yeah, that's where we should be. My husband and, by the time this comes out, 8-year-olds are both Gryffindors and are
brave.
Right.
Brave.
Right.
Yes,
and then
adventurers.
the almost 5-year-old, it has not quite been at the age where we can sort, because it asks you really specific kind of questions of would you choose this or that. You can also find out what your Patronus would be.
What's your Patronus?
Mine is like a chow chow dog, like a big pet chow, like a giant Pomeranian, which is funny because I actually had a Pomeranian for a while. That was just the best dog. She wasn't yippy and obnoxious. She was great. So it was like a really big version of her.
Do you know who Danny Oppenheimer is? Does that name ring a bell?
I feel like the name rings a bell, but
psychologist.
Not. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's a brilliant cognitive psychologist at Carnegie Mellon, and he's a huge Harry Potter fan. And he somehow has figured out how to do these he's one of the best speakers in academia. And he has done a number of talks where somehow every one of his cognitive psychology studies he's able to link to Harry Potter.
Yeah.
You should have him on the show. He's super fun to talk to, and you can nerd out on Harry Potter stuff.
Yeah.
I turned fluorescent red earlier in this interview, but no one could see. But he came at some point and I had said, he had his opening slide up and it was clear that this was going to be a Harry Potter themed cognitive psych talk. And I said to him, I love Harry Potter. I love that you're doing that. And at the beginning of his talk, in front of 75 of my senior colleagues, I was a 27-year-old assistant professor at Wharton with, he's like, Katy loves Harry Potter. And I was so red, so embarrassed. I was like, can I sink into my bed? Anyway, I do love Harry Potter. Now I'm more confident about it.
As do I. Well, if it makes you feel any better, when I was in my undergrad, and it's where still, Harry Potter books were kind of coming out and a thing, I used to tell people, it's I'm going to marry Harry Potter, and not Daniel Radcliffe, but Harry Potter, if this ends up being a person, that's a thing for me. So yeah, total ridiculous nerd on Harry Potter. And when I used to ride the bus to work, it's a temptation bundling thing, I guess, I would just listen to the audiobooks. Cause even if I fell asleep, I tried to listen.
They're so wonderful. There was some great New York Times coverage of the guy who does all of them. And he has 180 different voices, and he has the recordings of each one so that if he has to come back to a character, he listens to the way he did the voice the first time and gets it exactly right. I mean, it's so amazing. Anyway.
Well, we'll have to have other times to talk Harry Potter. Thank you for going on a tangent with me. I appreciate it.
I am assuming I'll probably cut most of that.
Heck no. No way.
The episode will actually be called, we're going to talk about Harry Potter. Wait, okay. I know you probably have 1 minute left.
I'm good. Yep. Okay, tell me.
I'll tell you one Harry Potter thing that did not make the book. There's this wonderful scene, I'm sure you know well, where, let's see if I'm going to come up with it. What's the lucky potion? Oh yeah. It's, Phineas.
Yeah. It's it's not in my
I can't think of it.
Space.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a potion that makes you lucky in one of the books. And there's this wonderful moment where Ron is nervous about playing in a Quidditch match, and Harry, through some sleight of hand, leads everyone to think that he put this potion into Ron's breakfast so that he would perform well in his first Quidditch match. And in fact, he didn't. But Ron believes that he's had the potion, and so does everyone else. And Ron has this amazing performance. And I actually love that, because a chapter of my book is about how if we are led to believe something, and mindset has this huge impact on what we can achieve. And the advice giving work is really, I think, very related to that too. Being asked for advice gives us the mindset and the belief that we are worthy of giving advice. And so we must know what we're doing and what we're talking about. So anyway, I love that there's little bits of brilliant psychology and brilliant behavioral science insight in Harry Potter too. And that's one of my favorite moments in that.
Totally. And I think I got it as we were talking. I think it's Felix Felicis.
Yes.
Right?
Oh my God. You're totally right. Felix Felicis.
Yeah.
Yes, it's that. And it's golden, and there's just a little of it. Yes. Yeah. Felicis, something like that.
Yeah. Pronunciations of this sort of thing is not really my jam. I was telling my membership group earlier this week so I interviewed somebody about their book, and the Hype Handbook by Michael F. Shine, which is a really cool book. And he's got one of his strategies is to become a magus, which is like magician, right? But like I would always use the word magician and not type out MAGUS as the word, to which I had to look up because it's like, I'm going to say this wrong and people are going to like reach out on the podcast to tell me how dumb I am. And so I looked it up and, listen, how to pronounce is like my thing I go to all the time. And so it says Magus. And the first thing I thought was, like Animagus is.
Yes.
Which funny. I was a little embarrassed for myself, but I also am now telling everybody, I guess.
It helps. It's whatever. It's learning through association. That's how the mind works.
So as we wrap up, it's been such a joy to speak with you. Of course, there will be a link to the book in the show notes, and we already have, for behavior change for good and choiceology. But what's the best way for people to find more about you? And if they wanted to connect to talk about, Harry Potter, maybe, but probably some of your research, where should they go?
www.katymilkman.com is the best place to find me. And there's, information about the book, and you can listen to episodes of Choiceology there, and all my research papers are there, and op-eds, and, you name it, it's all there. So also a link to my newsletter, Milkman Delivers, in case anybody wants to hear from me monthly.
Who
little
doesn't?
Tidbits.
Who doesn't want to hear from you monthly? I don't know. And for those who want to see even more, I would recommend following Katy on Twitter as well, to which we'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for joining me. It has been a delight. And I think we've shown I could just talk to you for all time, but we'll take a pause until next time.
This was so fun. Thank you for having me. I look forward to the next time, and congratulations on your book as well. Super excited about it. And can't wait to hold the copy in my hands.
I know. Exciting.
Yay.
So, what got your brain buzzing as you learned about how to change today? For me, I've enjoyed all the conversations over these last few weeks, looking at defaults and habits and how we can change and get better at anything we want to. It's been an inspirational theme this month that makes me feel very energized. What about you? I would, of course, love to learn more about what you're planning to change and or get better at, so come share it with me on social media. You'll find me as the Brainy Biz pretty much everywhere, and as Melina Palmer on LinkedIn. And of course, if your work, career, or job are part of that equation, you definitely don't want to miss this upcoming Friday's episode with Christopher Wong Michelson, where we discuss his new book, Is Your Work Worth It?, which he co-authored with Jen Toasty Karras. If you aren't already subscribed to the Brainy Business podcast, now is a great time to do so to ensure you don't miss that one or any other episode. There are, of course, links in the show notes to make it easy to subscribe, connect on social media, as well as to check out my top related past episodes and books like How to Change and more. It's all waiting for you in the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/430. And just like that, episode 430 on How to Change with Dr. Katy Milkman is done. Join me Friday for a brand new episode with Christopher Wong Michelson, co-author of Is Your Work Worth It? It's going to be a lot of fun. You don't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.